Jerome Holt was 38 years old, and until that afternoon, he believed three things without question: that a man who built something with his own hands deserved to keep it, that 19 years of brotherhood meant something, and that the woman he'd built a home for, literally built with his own crew on land his grandfather left him, was his partner in the fullest sense of the word. He came home early that day to save his marriage. Instead, he found the deadbolt changed on a door he'd hung himself, her car in the driveway, music playing inside, and through a gap in the bedroom curtains, candlelight, champagne on the nightstand he'd built from reclaimed oak, and a face he recognized. Not a stranger, his best friend of 19 years, his business partner, the man whose name sat beside his on every contract he'd ever signed. Jerome stepped back from that window, looked down at the ground beneath his feet, and in that moment, standing in the flower bed he'd planted himself, outside the house he'd built from the foundation up, something in him went completely, dangerously still. He had no idea yet just how deep this went, but he was about to find out. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The sun was barely up when Jerome Holt arrived at the site. The sky was that particular shade of gray-orange that only exists for about 15 minutes before the day makes up its mind. Jerome had always liked that window. The world was quiet in it, still enough to think. He parked his truck on the gravel shoulder, grabbed his coffee from the cup holder, and stepped out into the cool morning air. His boots hit the ground with the easy confidence of a man who had stood on 100 job sites just like this one. He unrolled the blueprints across the hood of his truck, smoothed the edges flat with both hands, and studied the plans the way a chess player studies the board, not just seeing what was there, but seeing what came next. His crew filtered in behind him over the following 20 minutes. There were no announcements, no assembly. Jerome simply looked up at each man as he arrived, nodded once, and pointed to where he needed them. That was enough. It had always been enough. "Marcus," he said, not looking up from the plans, "that west wall framing from yesterday. I need you to double-check the spacing on studs 7 through 12 before we go any further." Marcus, a big man with 20 years of carpentry behind him, didn't question it. He just said, "Yes, sir," and walked in that direction, because Marcus had worked with Jerome long enough to know that when Jerome flagged something, something was actually there. That was how it had always been. Jerome did not speak to fill silence. He spoke when he had something worth saying. He had built this company from nothing. Not from a loan his father co-signed, not from a family connection that opened the first door. From nothing. He'd started with a used pickup truck, a set of tools he bought piece by piece, and a reputation he constructed the same way he constructed everything else, carefully, correctly, one solid piece at a time. Holt Contracting was 12 years old now, 14 employees, a waiting list for residential projects that ran 4 months deep. Jerome took a slow sip of his coffee and looked out at the framing rising from the ground, the clean geometric skeleton of a house that didn't exist yet. He felt the same quiet satisfaction he always felt at this stage of a build. Before the drywall, before the finishes, before everything got covered up. This was when you could see the whole truth of a structure, whether the bones were right, whether it would hold. His phone buzzed in his shirt pocket. He already knew who it was before he looked. Darius, the name on the screen with a photo from 8 years back. The two of them at a ribbon cutting for their first big commercial job, both grinning like idiots. Jerome answered. "You're calling me before 7, Jerome said. "Must be broke." Darius's laugh came through the line like it always did, big and easy, the kind of laugh that filled every room it entered. "Man, I am broke. You keep signing off on the materials orders. I haven't eaten in 3 days." You were eating a steak when I saw you Thursday. That was an investment in my morale. It's a business expense. A pause. Then, in his actual voice, Greenfield callback came in. They want to move the start date up 2 weeks. We can't move it up 2 weeks. That's what I told them. Then why are you telling me? Because they asked if you might see it differently. Darius's voice carried that particular edge of amusement he got whenever someone made the mistake of thinking Jerome was the flexible one. I told them I would ask. I asked. Now I can tell them you don't see it differently. I don't see it differently. Shocking. Jerome could hear the smile. You headed to the site all day? Jerome looked out at his crew moving across the framing, each man in his place, the whole operation ticking over like something well-tuned. Actually, he said, I'm thinking about heading home early, surprise Andrea, maybe cook dinner. A small beat. Then Darius said, Yeah, that's good, man. Good. We've been like ships lately, Jerome said. It was the most he would say about it. He was not a man who narrated his feelings at length, but Darius was the one person on earth who could hear the whole sentence in half a word. I just want to make an effort. Do that, Darius said. Simply. No jokes this time. They wrapped up the call and Jerome slid the phone back into his pocket. He stood there for a moment, thinking about the house. Not as a structure. He had evaluated it structurally 100 times, every joint and every beam, but as a place, his grandfather's land, ground that had been in the family before Jerome was born, left to him with the quiet expectation that he would do something worthy with it. He had. He'd built the house himself, with his own crew. Andrea had picked everything else, the kitchen tile, the cabinet hardware, the color of every single room. Jerome had stood back and let her do it without one word of interference. He hadn't minded. Not even a little. That was love, he had always figured. You build the structure. You let the person you chose make it a home. By mid-afternoon, he had signed off on the day's progress, handed the site to Marcus, and was back in his truck with the windows down, the radio low, and nothing on his mind but the drive home. Jerome turned into his driveway at 3:30 and felt, for just a moment, like the afternoon had gotten something right. The neighborhood was quiet. The oak tree in the front yard threw long shadows across the lawn. His house sat at the end of the concrete path exactly as it always did. The red brick facing he'd laid himself, the covered porch with the 2 chairs Andrea had picked out from a catalog 3 summers ago, everything in its place. He parked, grabbed his keys, and walked to the front door. The key went in clean. He turned it. Nothing. He frowned. Tried again, slower this time, making sure he had the right one. He did. He always had the same key on the same ring in the same pocket. He turned it again. The deadbolt didn't move. Jerome stood there for a moment, with his hand still on the key, looking at the door. His door. He had hung this door himself. Solid mahogany, pre-hung unit, 3.5-inch hinges, because he didn't believe in doing things halfway. His name was on the deed to this house, on the land his grandfather had left him, and the deadbolt he was now standing in front of had been changed. He pulled the key out, looked at it. Then he took a breath and called Andrea. He could hear it, faint, muffled, but unmistakable. Her ringtone going off somewhere inside the house. He stood on the porch and listened to it ring 4 times, 5 times, and roll to voicemail. He hung up and called again. Same thing. The phone rang inside. The music playing beneath it didn't pause. Nobody came to the door. Her car was in the driveway. He had walked right past it. Jerome stepped off the porch and stood on the front walk. He looked at the house the way he looked at any structure when something wasn't adding up, taking in the whole shape of it first, before he went looking for the specific problem. The upstairs windows were dark. The living room curtains were drawn. The music was something slow and low, barely audible through the walls. He called one more time. Voicemail. He put the phone in his pocket and started walking around the side of the house. Not fast. Not slow. The even, unhurried stride of a man gathering information. The side gate was unlocked, he noticed that, and he passed through it into the backyard, past the garden beds he'd framed out with cedar planks 2 springs ago, along the back of the house toward the bedroom side. He stopped. The bedroom curtains were drawn, but not all the way. There was a gap at the edge, maybe 2 inches wide, and through it came a warm amber light, the particular glow of candles, not the overhead fixture. Jerome stood in the flower bed he'd planted himself, the dark soil soft under his boots, and looked through that gap. The champagne flutes were on the nightstand. His nightstand, the one he'd built 3 years ago from reclaimed oak he'd sourced himself, sanded down to nothing and finished by hand, because he'd wanted it to be right. The candles were on the dresser. Silk. A woman in it. Andrea. And a man's back. Jerome stood very still. The amber light moved slightly as one of the candles flickered. The music came through the walls, muffled and slow. He took in the whole picture, the way he'd trained himself to take in any scene, completely, without flinching, without letting his mind skip ahead to what it meant before he had finished seeing what it was. He saw what it was. He stepped back out of the flower bed. He looked down at the grass under his feet for a moment. Then he turned and walked back toward the garage with the same even stride, the same unhurried pace, as if he were walking to retrieve a tool he needed for a job he had already planned. The garage side door opened with the code he'd set when they moved in. He stepped inside. It took him less than 30 seconds to find what he was looking for. The Louisville Slugger was leaning in the back corner behind the shelving unit, right where it had always been since he'd coached Troy's little league team 15 years ago. The wood grip was smooth from use, the barrel still solid. Jerome wrapped his hand around it, felt the familiar weight of it, and walked back out of the garage. He walked around the side of the house without breaking stride. He stopped in front of the bedroom window. He planted his feet in the flower bed, shoulder-width apart, the same way he'd taught Troy to stand at the plate when Troy was 11 years old and couldn't keep his elbow up. He lined up, and he swung. The window didn't just break. It came apart all at once. The glass, the frame, the curtain rod, the whole thing folding inward in a single violent instant. Glass scattering across the bedroom floor like a wave breaking, the wall shuddering from the impact all the way up to the eave. Jerome stood in the flower bed with the bat at his side and waited for the curtain to settle. Andrea screamed. The man spun around. Jerome looked at his face. Darius Webb stood frozen on the other side of the wreckage with the expression of a man whose entire world had just rearranged itself in the span of 1 second. Andrea pressed back against the headboard, one hand over her mouth. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. Jerome looked at the two of them. He held Darius's eyes. "Get your clothes on," he said. His voice was even, quiet. The voice he used on job sites when something needed to be corrected, and he only intended to say it once. "You've got 1 hour." He set the bat carefully against the side of the house. He walked back to the front, picked up his laptop bag and his work files from the porch where he'd left them, got in his truck. He did not look back. Jerome parked 2 houses down and turned off the engine. He didn't get out. He just sat there, both hands still on the wheel, looking at nothing in particular through the windshield. The street was quiet. A sprinkler was going somewhere nearby, and he could hear the faint tick-tick-tick of it over the sound of his own breathing. He let the quiet stay quiet. He was not a man who made decisions while he was still inside the feeling. He had learned that early, from job sites, from hard bids, from the years when every mistake he made cost him money he didn't have to lose. You waited until you could see clearly. You didn't move until you understood the whole structure of the problem. That was the discipline. That was the thing that separated a man who built something lasting from a man who just swung a hammer until something fell down. So he sat, and he let his mind do what it had always done better than almost anything else. He worked the problem. The distance between him and Andrea, he had dated it to about 8 months ago, somewhere around last October. That was when things had started feeling off. Small things. She would put her phone face down when he walked into a room. Not every time, just often enough that he'd noticed, and then told himself he hadn't. When he'd asked about it once, gently, she had laughed it off with a sentence so easy and natural that he had felt ashamed for asking. He had told himself he was being paranoid. He sat with that for a moment. Then he thought about the jobs. Darius, over the last 18 months or so, had been the one pushing to take contracts further out. Not far. Just far enough. A commercial renovation 2 counties over that ran through 3 weekends. A site assessment down south that stretched into a full week because of permit delays Darius had flagged early, and Jerome had driven down to manage personally. A string of Saturday morning consultations that seemed to arrive in clusters. Jerome had taken all of it without question, because that was who he was. You showed up. You handled what needed to be handled. You didn't look for reasons to let the business slide. He understood now that he had been scheduled. The word landed in his mind with a particular kind of weight. Not lied to, not manipulated. Scheduled. His own work ethic, the same discipline he'd spent 19 years being respected for, had been turned around and used against him like a key in a door. Someone had looked at the thing he was most proud of and figured out exactly how to make it into a wall that kept him away from his own house. He thought about Darius, not the man in the bedroom. He put that image away immediately, locked it in the same place he put every problem he wasn't ready to solve yet. He thought about the other version, the one who'd stood beside him when they signed their first real contract, the one who'd helped him pour the foundation of this business with nothing but 2 sets of hands and more debt than either of them should have been comfortable carrying. 19 years, every holiday table, every late night in the office when the numbers weren't adding up and they'd talked each other through it. Every time Jerome had put Darius's name next to his on a contract because he trusted him like blood. He let himself feel the full weight of it. Not long, just long enough to be honest about what it cost. Because it did cost something. It cost the particular kind of grief that doesn't come from hate, the kind that comes from realizing the person you trusted was watching you build something and had already decided, somewhere along the way, that it was theirs to take. Jerome exhaled slowly through his nose. Then he picked up his phone and called his brother. Troy picked up on the second ring. Jerome said 3 words, "Come pick me up." He gave him the cross streets. He hung up. Troy was there in 12 minutes. Jerome heard the truck before he saw it. Troy always drove a little too fast when something was wrong, as if speed could get him to his brother sooner than roads would allow. The truck pulled up alongside him and stopped. The passenger window came down. Troy looked at Jerome's face. Jerome opened his door and got in. He set his laptop bag between his feet and looked straight ahead. Troy said nothing. He just put the truck in drive and pulled out. They rode in silence. Jerome watched the street pass. At the corner, Troy turned, and Jerome caught a last angle of his house in the passenger side mirror. The oak tree, the red brick facing, the covered porch with the 2 chairs from the catalog, getting smaller, getting further away. He watched it go. He did not look away until the mirror turned and the house slid out of frame, and there was nothing behind them but the empty road. Jerome faced forward again. "Take me to Mama's," he said. Phyllis Holt's house smelled the same way it always had. Coffee and cedar and something faintly sweet from whatever she'd had in the oven earlier in the day. The porch light was already on when Troy pulled into the driveway, which meant she had heard the truck coming from half a block away, the way she always did. By the time Jerome reached the front steps, she was holding the door open. She looked at his face. She didn't say a word. She just stepped back and let him in. The kitchen table was old oak, solid and worn at the edges from decades of use. Jerome sat down in the same chair he had been sitting in since he was 9 years old. Troy stood in the doorway behind him, arms crossed, jaw tight, filling the frame the way he always did when he was managing something he hadn't been given permission to express yet. Phyllis set a cup of coffee in front of Jerome. She poured one for herself. She sat down across from him and folded her hands and waited. Jerome looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked up at his mother and told her everything. He didn't rush it. He laid it out the way he laid out a structural problem, start to finish, in order, without skipping anything, coming home early, the lock, the phone going unanswered inside the house, walking around to the bedroom window, what he saw through the curtain gap, the bat, the window, the face that looked back at him from inside his own bedroom. Darius. Phyllis did not flinch. She did not gasp or press her hand to her mouth or reach across the table. She just sat there and took it in with the steady patience of a woman who had absorbed hard things before and knew that her job right now was to receive, not react. When Jerome finished, the kitchen went quiet. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of Troy breathing a little harder than normal in the doorway. Phyllis looked down at her coffee cup. She was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Jerome simply waited, because he had learned years ago that his mother's silences were not empty. Then she said, "I need to tell you something." Jerome looked at her. "About 6 months ago," she said, slow and even. "I was driving past your street on my way to Evelyn's, a Tuesday afternoon. You were on that job down south, the one that ran the whole week." She paused. "Darius's car was parked in front of your house." The kitchen stayed quiet. Jerome didn't move. "I slowed down," Phyllis said. "I sat there for a moment, and then I told myself I was seeing something that wasn't there." She looked at her son steadily, and something behind her eyes carried the specific weight of a woman reckoning with her own silence. "I kept driving. I never said a word to you." Jerome absorbed that. 6 months, at minimum, possibly longer, because 6 months ago was simply the first time someone had happened to drive past on the right street on the right afternoon. The beginning could have been earlier than that. He adjusted the timeline in his mind with the same quiet precision he brought to a materials estimate that had come in wrong. You didn't panic. You just corrected the number and understood that everything downstream from it needed to be recalculated. "There's something else," Phyllis said. She set her cup down. "The cookout. Back in the spring." She folded her hands again. "You remember, you said something about possibly buying out Darius's share, going fully independent. You said it at the table, just thinking out loud the way you do." Jerome remembered. "I was watching Andrea when you said it," Phyllis said. "I didn't understand what I was looking at then. I do now." She held his gaze. She looked at Darius, fast, barely a second, and he looked back at her. It wasn't a surprised look. It wasn't a worried look. She paused. It was a checking look, like two people making sure the other one heard the same thing. Jerome sat very still. He turned that over once, carefully. He thought about what it meant, not just the affair, not just the betrayal in the most personal sense. He thought about the timing of that moment, the buyout comment, the look that passed between them. Two people who had already been talking, not just about each other, but about him, about his business, about what was his. This was not just an affair. Behind him, Troy pushed off the doorframe. "I'm going to find him," Troy said. His voice was quiet, which on Troy was almost worse than loud. "Tonight. I just need to know where he—" "No." Jerome said it without turning around. "Jerome, I said no." He turned then and looked at his brother, not with anger, with the particular calm that had always worked on Troy better than any raised voice ever could. "You don't move. You don't call him. You don't drive past his house. You don't do anything. Troy's jaw worked. He looked at the ceiling. He looked back down. So what do we do? Jerome turned back to face forward. He thought for one more moment. Then he said, "We plan." He looked at his mother, then back at Troy. "Tomorrow morning, you go into work, like nothing happened. Same time, same face, same everything. You say nothing to nobody." He kept his voice flat and steady. "I'll be at a motel tonight. I'll be in touch." Jerome was in the office by 5:15. The building was dark, except for the security light above the back entrance. He let himself in with his key, moved through the hallway without turning on the overheads, and sat down at his desk in the front office. He opened his laptop. He opened the filing cabinet to his left. He pulled out the binders. He started at the beginning, 18 months back, January of last year. He laid the bank statements flat on the desk and set the corresponding vendor invoices beside them and began moving through them the way he would walk a job site with a problem he hadn't diagnosed yet. Slowly, methodically, not looking for anything specific, just looking, letting the picture form on its own. The first hour produced nothing obvious. That was the point. He was starting to understand. Nothing about this was obvious. By 8 o'clock, when Troy arrived and the rest of the crew began filtering in and out, Jerome had already found the first one. A materials invoice from a supplier they used regularly. Lumber order, itemized correctly, totaled correctly at first glance. But Jerome had been reviewing lumber costs long enough to know the price per board foot by memory. And this invoice was running about 11% high. Not dramatically high. Not the kind of number that triggered an alarm. The kind of number a busy man would round off in his head and move past. Jerome did not move past it. He pulled the corresponding job record. Then the client billing sheet. The client had been charged for the full invoice amount. He went to the delivery log. The delivery had come in short, 14% under the invoiced quantity. The difference had never been noted, never adjusted, never credited back to the client. He set that invoice to the side and kept going. By noon he had 17, not $17, 17 separate instances, spread across different vendors, different job sites, different months, each one small enough to read as a rounding error or a clerical slip or a vendor mistake that just never got corrected. Ghost labor hours on a job in the spring that had been fully completed 2 weeks before the hours were logged. A roofing materials order billed in full to a client on a job where Jerome himself remembered them coming in under budget. A subcontractor invoice paid out of the business account for work that, when Jerome checked the site schedule, had been performed by his own crew. Jerome did not raise his voice. He did not push back from his desk. He just kept going, pulling the next file, cross-referencing the next column, setting the next document aside with the same steady hands he used to frame a wall. By 3 o'clock, the pile to his left had grown. By 4 o'clock, he had run the total twice to make sure he had it right. $74,000. He sat with that number for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Troy into the office, closing the door behind him. Troy looked at the desk, the files spread wide, the binders open, the yellow legal pad where Jerome had been running tallies, and his face went through several things in quick succession. "How much?" Troy asked. Jerome told him. Troy put both hands on the back of the empty chair and gripped it. 18 months, Jerome said. Patient. Careful. Nothing big enough to set off an alarm if you weren't looking for it. He let that sit. He was building toward something. He needed money he could move without me seeing it. Troy was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was controlled in the specific way of someone actively choosing not to be the other thing. "What do you need me to do?" Jerome told him. He needed Troy to keep pulling the vendor records for the last 6 months. Quietly, at his own desk, during normal hours, the same way he did any other administrative task. He needed it done without a word to anyone on the crew. He needed Darius to walk through that office and see exactly what he expected to see. Jerome managing operations, Troy managing the site, everything running the way it always ran. Troy nodded once, sharp and tight. "Normal face," Jerome said. "I know," Troy said. "Every day, until I say otherwise." Troy looked at him. "I said I know, Jerome." Jerome let it go. He picked up his phone and made a call he had already decided to make before he sat down at the desk that morning. The attorney's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, plain and functional, smelling of old paper and commercial carpet. Her name was Renata Cross. Jerome had heard her name twice in professional circles, both times from people who were glad they had hired her and not the other side. He set the folder on her desk. 43 pages, photographed and organized. She read for 20 minutes while he sat still in the chair across from her. When she looked up, she said, "This is clean work. Can you move on it?" "Civil action, absolutely. Depending on what else comes out, and I think more will come out. There's a real criminal fraud question here, too." She tapped the folder. "This pattern isn't accidental." "I know it isn't," Jerome said. "What do you want to do with it?" "Prepare the complaint," he said. "Everything ready to file, and then hold it." She looked at him over the top of the folder. "Okay," she said. "How long?" Jerome thought about the look that had passed between Darius and Andrea at the cookout. He thought about 18 months of patient, engineered theft. He thought about how long it takes to build something that will not fall down. "Not long," he said. Jerome called her at 8:15 in the morning, sitting on the edge of the motel bed with the curtains still drawn. The phone rang 3 times. Then Andrea picked up, and her voice came through careful and composed, like she had been waiting for the call and had already decided how to receive it. "Jerome, I think we should sit down," he said. "Just the two of us, somewhere neutral. Talk through things like adults." A brief pause. Not hesitation, calculation. Then, "Yes, I think that's a good idea." They agreed on a coffee shop near the center of town. 2 o'clock. Jerome said fine. He hung up and looked at the wall for a moment. Then he got dressed and drove to the office. He spent the first hour of the morning changing passwords. Every shared business account, every vendor portal, every payroll login that had ever been accessible from outside the main office. He worked through the list without rushing, one account at a time, until there was not a single door into the company's finances that the old credentials would open. Then he drove to the coffee shop. Andrea was already there when he arrived. She had taken a corner table near the window, which struck him immediately. She had chosen visibility. She wanted to be seen as the composed one. She was wearing a gray blouse he had seen before, her hair pulled back, her hands folded around a coffee cup she hadn't drunk from yet. She looked like someone who had gotten a full night's sleep and prepared. He sat down across from her. The server came. He ordered black coffee. He looked at Andrea and waited. She started talking. She was good at it. He had always known she was good at it. The language came out smooth and practiced, growing apart, unmet needs, a marriage that had stopped working for a long time, 2 people who had tried. She spoke about emotional distance, about long hours, about feeling like she had been living next to someone rather than with someone. Her voice stayed even throughout. There was no anger in it, no real sadness either, just the measured delivery of a person reciting a position they had rehearsed to the point where it no longer felt like a performance. Jerome let her go. He did not interrupt. He did not shift in his chair. He held his coffee cup with both hands and kept his eyes on her face, and listened to every word she said, with the full, patient attention of a man cataloging information rather than absorbing a wound. When she finished, the table went quiet. Jerome nodded slowly, like he was considering everything she had laid out. Then he asked, "Is there anything about the business you want me to know?" The flicker was fast. It moved across her face the way a shadow crosses a wall when something passes by a window. there and gone before a person who wasn't watching for it would ever catch it. Her eyes went somewhere for less than a second, somewhere internal and alert, and then she brought them back, and her expression was smooth again. "No," she said. "That's your world. I don't know anything about the business side of things." Jerome nodded again. He picked up his coffee. She moved on, pivoting into what he understood was the real purpose of the meeting, the financial expectations she had come prepared to set. She spoke carefully about the house, about assets, about the life they had built together. And then, almost offhandedly, in the tone of someone simply offering a reasonable piece of context, she said, "Darius mentioned the business has been going through a rough stretch lately. I want us both to be realistic about what we're actually working with here." Jerome looked at her. She held his gaze, unhurried, like what she had just said was the most ordinary thing in the world. He said nothing for a moment. He set his cup down. He thought about Renata Cross's voice saying this pattern isn't accidental. He thought about $74,000, moved carefully and quietly over 18 months. He thought about a man who had been siphoning money from their business while simultaneously feeding Andrea a story about that same business being in trouble. A story she was now sitting across from Jerome and repeating without knowing that what she had just done was hand him something he could use. She didn't know. She did not know that Darius had no business sharing anything about the company's finances with her. She did not know that using that information, even casually, even as a throwaway line, had just drawn a direct line between herself and a coordinated conspiracy. She had meant it as a negotiating move. It was something else entirely. Jerome looked at her for a beat longer than she expected. Then he let it go and guided the conversation toward a close. He told her he appreciated her coming. He told her he needed some time to think. She nodded, and her eyes held the particular satisfaction of a woman who believed the meeting had gone the way she planned. She did not ask where he had been staying. She did not ask if he was sleeping. She did not ask if he was okay. Not once. Jerome walked to his truck. He sat down, closed the door, and called Renata Cross. "She told me Darius briefed her on the company's finances," he said. "Used it as a settlement tactic. She had no idea what she was confirming." He could hear Renata writing. "That's conspiracy," she said. "I know," Jerome said. "Now I need a divorce attorney." Jerome met with his divorce attorney the morning after the coffee shop. Her name was Patricia Osei. She had sharp eyes and a clean desk and the quiet confidence of someone who had sat across from hundreds of people in the worst seasons of their lives and helped them find their footing. She reviewed the property documents Jerome brought, the deed, the land transfer records from his grandfather's estate, the construction permits, and she read them the way a doctor reads a chart. "The land predates the marriage by 11 years, she said, without looking up. "Yes, and the structure was built by your own company, your crew, your materials, your labor costs." "That's right." She set the papers down and looked at him. "Then Andrea has no real claim on the house. A competent attorney will tell her that. If she has an incompetent one, they may try anyway, but they won't get far." Jerome nodded. He had already known, but he needed to hear it from someone who could put it in writing. He thanked her, scheduled a follow-up, and drove back to the motel. He sat on the edge of the bed for a while. Then he picked up his phone and called Karen Webb. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was even, controlled. "Jerome." "Karen, I need to see you. Away from the neighborhood. Just us." He kept his voice level. "It's important." A pause, not a long one. "Tell me when and where." The diner was 20 minutes from the neighborhood, far enough to be nobody they knew. Jerome arrived first and took a booth in the back corner, away from the windows. He ordered coffee and set a manila folder on the table in front of the empty seat across from him. Karen came through the door 8 minutes later. She was dressed for work. A navy blazer, her hair neat, a leather bag over her shoulder. She moved with the kind of posture that suggested she did not allow herself the luxury of looking uncertain in public. She spotted Jerome, walked directly to the booth, and sat down. She looked at the folder. Then she looked at him. "Say what you came to say," she said. Jerome slid the folder across the table. "Everything I know is in there," he said. "You can look at it now or take it home. That's your call." Karen opened it. She went through the contents the way someone reads a document they intend to remember. Slowly, without expression, eyes moving line by line. There were phone records. There were the financial logs Jerome had included to give her the full scope of what Darius had been building. And near the back, there was a photograph, printed clean and clear. Jerome had pulled it from Andrea's own archived social media, a restaurant 2 cities over, 8 months ago. Andrea and Darius at a corner table, Darius's hand over hers, both of them leaning in across the table in the way that people lean when they believe no one who matters is watching. Andrea had tagged the location. She had posted it under a caption about a solo girls' trip. Karen looked at that photograph for longer than she looked at anything else. The diner moved around them. A table of men laughed near the entrance. The coffee machine hissed. Karen did not look up. When she finally did, her eyes were dry and steady, and something behind them had gone very still. "How long?" she said. "Documented. 8 months," Jerome said. "I have reason to believe it started before that." She held his gaze. He did not flinch, and he did not soften it, because she had not come here for softness. She had come here for the truth, and she was owed every inch of it. He told her about the financial records, about the theft, about the way Darius had been building an exit strategy across multiple fronts simultaneously. He kept his voice low and his words plain, and he told her everything he knew, in order, without editorializing. Karen listened the same way Jerome listened, completely, without interruption. When he finished, she closed the folder. She slid it back across the table toward him, her hand flat on top of it for just a moment before she let go. "You'll need this more than I will," she said. Her voice had gone quiet. Not broken, just quiet, the way a room goes quiet after something loud has passed through it. "I'm sorry," Jerome said. "I didn't want to be the one sitting here." "I know." She picked up her bag. She looked at him one more time with the measured expression of a woman who had already begun deciding what came next. "Thank you for coming to me directly." She stood up. She walked out. Jerome watched her cross the parking lot through the window, and he stayed in the booth until her car was gone. His phone rang at 9:47 that same evening. Troy. Jerome answered on the first ring. "I found something." Troy's voice was tight. Controlled for Troy, which meant he was working hard to keep it that way. "Darius has been talking to a regional contracting firm. Behind your back. He's been telling them he runs the operation. Jerome, he's been setting you up for a buyout. A forced one. Below market. He's been moving toward this for months." Jerome sat very still on the edge of the motel bed. He did not speak right away. He let the full shape of it settle. The affair, the $74,000, and now this. A complete architecture of destruction, built patiently over 18 months, designed to leave him with nothing from any direction at once. "Stop digging," Jerome said. "I have everything I need." He paused. "Come to Mama's tomorrow night." Phyllis's kitchen smelled like coffee, and the last hour of a pot roast she had turned off before they arrived. She didn't fuss about feeding them. She set 3 mugs on the table and sat down and looked at her oldest son with the focused attention of a woman who understood that what was about to be said mattered. Troy sat across from Jerome. He had his hands flat on the table, the way he did when he was working very hard not to do anything with them. Jerome opened his folder. He laid everything out in order. The theft documentation, the divorce filing status, the regional contractor communications, the evidence he had given Karen. He walked them through it the same way he walked a crew through a project plan. No drama, No pauses for effect. Just the full picture, piece by piece, until it was all on the table in front of them. When he finished, nobody said anything for a moment. Troy looked down at the documents. His jaw was tight. "So he built a whole exit," he said. Not a question. Just the sound of a man absorbing something that was even worse than he had already imagined. "Yes," Jerome said. And Andrea knew. She knew enough. Troy pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling for a second. Then he looked back at Jerome. "Okay," he said. "What do we do?" Jerome told them. The next morning, Jerome called the regional contracting firm from the motel parking lot. He had the name of the project manager Darius had been communicating with, a man named Garrett, professional enough, who had clearly been given a version of Jerome's company that centered Darius in every room. Jerome introduced himself, calmly, directly. He explained that he was the founder and primary operator of the firm, and that his partner had been conducting these negotiations without the authority to do so. He explained, briefly and without hostility, that significant legal action was forthcoming against that partner, and that any agreement made under his misrepresentation would not be honored. He gave the man his attorney's direct line. Garrett asked 2 questions. Jerome answered both clearly. The call lasted 9 minutes. That afternoon, Garrett called Darius and withdrew. Darius did not call Jerome. Jerome noted that. His business litigation attorney had the civil complaint ready by end of day. 62 pages, fully documented, citing $74,000 in financial crimes with supporting records for every single transaction. Alongside it, a business separation agreement calculated from Darius's actual remaining equity after the stolen funds were subtracted. The number was considerably smaller than what Darius believed he was walking away with. Jerome reviewed both documents that evening, made 2 small notes in the margin, and sent them back to his attorney with instructions. Hold everything until after the meeting. His divorce attorney had already confirmed what Jerome needed to know. The house stood on inherited land predating the marriage by 11 years. The structure was built by Jerome's own crew. Andrea's claim on it was, in her attorney's careful words, not viable. The projected settlement reflected the actual financial picture of the marriage, not the inflated version Darius had been quietly feeding Andrea to shape her expectations. Jerome filed that information where it needed to go. He called Darius that same evening. His voice was easy, warm even. He asked how the week was going. Let Darius run through his usual update. Clients, timelines, nothing urgent. And then Jerome said, casual as anything, that he wanted to sit down and go through some accounting questions. Just some numbers that needed clarification. Routine stuff. Just want to make sure the books are clean before the quarter closes, Jerome said. Yeah, of course, Darius said. He sounded relaxed, unhurried. Like a man who had already decided he was in control of every conversation he would have this week. You want to do Thursday? Thursday works, Jerome said. He hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. Then he called Troy. He called his mother. He called each of them once, and he said the same thing to both. The meeting was set for Thursday morning, the conference room 9 a.m. Troy's job between now and then was to keep showing up to work with the exact same energy he showed every other morning. No changes, no looks. Nothing that would cause Darius to feel the ground shifting. Troy said, I can do that. Jerome believed him. As for Karen, Karen was already moving. Jerome had not directed her, and he would not. She had looked at that folder with her own eyes and made her own decisions in the hours and days since. Whatever she was building it on her own terms. That was as it should be. The night before the meeting, Jerome sat at the small desk in the motel room with the 60-page folder open in front of him. He went through it once. Every page, every number, every date cross-referenced against every corresponding record. It was all there. Every piece, exactly where it needed to be. He closed the folder. He set it beside his laptop bag, on top of his pressed shirt for the morning. He turned off the light. He was asleep by 10:15. Jerome arrived at the office at 7:50. The rest of the building was quiet. A few lights on in the front office, one of the crew guys pulling an early inventory in the back lot. Nobody in the conference room. Jerome had made sure of that. He set his laptop bag against the wall. He straightened the 2 chairs on his side of the table, then straightened the one on Darius's side. He placed the 60-page folder directly in front of that chair, centered, squared to the table's edge, closed. He moved the whiteboard marker tray 2 inches to the left because it was bothering him. Then he poured himself a cup of coffee from the machine in the corner, sat down in his chair, and waited. He did not check his phone. He did not review the folder again. He had reviewed it the night before, and he knew every page the way he knew every room in the house he built, the measurements, the materials, where every joint was, and how strong it was. There was nothing in that folder that was going to surprise him this morning. At 9:03, he heard Darius's truck in the lot. Darius came through the door with his coffee already in hand, and a small smile going, the loose, easy stride of a man, arriving to something he was not worried about. He wore a clean gray shirt and his good watch. He looked, Jerome thought, like a man who had slept well. "You're already set up," Darius said. It wasn't quite an observation, and it wasn't quite a joke. He pulled out his chair and sat down, glancing at the folder in front of him the way you glance at a menu you're planning to enjoy. Jerome said, "Go ahead and open that." Darius set down his coffee and opened the folder. The first page was the summary sheet, a clean 1-page overview Jerome's attorney had prepared, laying out the total figure, the time period, and the categories of fraud. $60 of a vendor overcharge looked like nothing. $1,500 in ghost labor looked like a rounding error. Laid out across 18 months, across 11 categories, with a total of $74,000 printed in plain black type at the bottom of the page. It looked like what it was. Darius's eyes moved across the page. His expression didn't change, exactly, but his hand stopped moving. Jerome began walking him through it. He did not raise his voice. He did not editorialize. He spoke the same way he would explain a structural report to a client. This is what the document shows. This is the date. This is the corresponding bank record. This is the discrepancy. He named each vendor. He cited each date. He identified each mechanism. The invoice inflated by this amount. The labor hours logged on a project that closed 6 weeks prior. The materials charged to a client account that never appeared in any delivery record. Page by page. Darius tried denial on page 9. "There's context for some of this," he said. His voice was measured, careful. "Some of these vendor relationships, the pricing fluctuates. I don't think you're reading the full picture here." Jerome turned to page 10 and continued. Darius tried minimization somewhere around page 23. "Jerome!" He leaned back, spread his hands a little. "Some of this got away from me, okay? It was never... This wasn't some big scheme. You know me better than that. If there are some numbers that need to be corrected, I'm not opposed to sitting down and—" Jerome turned to page 24 and continued. By page 40, Darius had gone quiet. He was sitting very still, looking at the folder the way a man looks at a wall he has just walked into. The easy energy from when he walked in was gone. What was underneath it was not comfortable to look at. Jerome finished the walkthrough. He set his pen down. And then Darius did the thing Jerome had already accounted for. He looked up from the folder, and he said, quietly and with the particular tone of a man reaching for the only weapon he had left, "You want to talk about why Andrea was unhappy? You want to talk about how long this marriage has been a problem? Because that started before me. That started with you, Jerome. The hours, the distance." Jerome let him go. He sat there and let Darius build the entire structure of it, brick by brick. The marriage, the distance, the unmet needs, Andrea's unhappiness, the suggestion, soft but unmistakable, that Jerome had somehow authored his own betrayal. Darius's voice found its rhythm again as he talked. A little of the old ease came back. He was a man who had always been at his best when he was performing for an audience. Jerome waited until he was completely finished. Then he said, "You done?" He reached into the back section of his folder. He slid 2 documents across the table side by side in front of Darius's hands. The civil complaint on the left, 62 pages, signed by Jerome's attorney, ready to file with the court by end of business today if Jerome made 1 phone call. The business separation agreement on the right, a clean document, professionally drafted, built on Darius's actual remaining equity once the stolen $74,000 was subtracted from his stake. The number on that agreement was not the number Darius had been planning on. Jerome gave him a moment to look at both. 72 hours, Jerome said. You sign the separation agreement, we close this privately. You don't sign, I file. Full discovery. Public record. The regional contractor's testimony about the conversations you had. The forensic accountant's report. He paused. Your call. Jerome stood. He collected his folder. He straightened his jacket. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and looked back once, not with anger, not with grief, with the same flat, clear expression he had worn standing in the flower bed in the dark, with a baseball bat at his side, the expression of a man who had already done the math and already knew how this ended. He left without another word. Darius sat in the conference room alone for a while. Then he called his attorney. His attorney asked him to send the documents immediately. Darius photographed both and sent them from the parking lot, sitting in his truck in the sun, his coffee cold in the cup holder. His attorney called back in 2 hours. He had reviewed everything. His voice was careful and even, the voice of a professional delivering news that is not good. He told Darius that the documentation was thorough, that the forensic accounting summary would hold up in court, and that the regional contractor's involvement in discovery would significantly complicate his position. He told Darius that the separation agreement, while not generous, was substantially better than what a civil judgment and potential criminal referral would produce. He told Darius to sign. Darius signed the separation agreement 47 hours later. Jerome called Andrea at 8:15 the morning after Darius signed. He kept it short. He told her he needed one final meeting at the house. He told her she was welcome to bring her sister, or whoever she wanted with her. He told her his mother would be present. He told her it was not a negotiation. It was a closing. He asked if 11 o'clock worked. Andrea said yes. He got there at 10:30. He walked through the front door with his key. The original key, the one that had never stopped working because this lock had never been changed, and stood for a moment in the front hallway. The floors were white oak, hand-laid by his crew over a long weekend 4 years ago. The light through the south-facing windows hit the grain in a particular way in the morning that Jerome had always liked. The kitchen was straight ahead, the same kitchen he had designed from the bones out. Every cabinet run and countertop measurement his own work, before Andrea had chosen the finishes and the fixtures and the hardware that she wanted. He had always liked that she made it beautiful. He had never minded giving her that. He made a pot of coffee, and he waited. Andrea arrived at 3 minutes past 11. Her older sister Renee was with her, one step behind, wearing the expression of a woman who had come prepared to speak. Jerome was standing in the kitchen when they came through the door. He did not move toward them. He said good morning. He gestured toward the coffee. Renee declined with the specific energy of someone making a point. Jerome poured a cup for his mother, who had come in quietly through the back door 5 minutes earlier, and was now seated at the kitchen table with the stillness of someone who had already decided the outcome of this morning. Andrea sat down across from Phyllis. Renee remained standing for a moment, then sat beside her sister with her hands folded on the table. Jerome stood. He did not have a folder this time. No 60-page document. He spoke the way he always spoke when something mattered. Plainly, directly, without performance. He told Andrea he knew the affair had been running for at least 8 months, possibly longer. He told her he knew that Darius had been sharing information about the business with her. Not honest information, but a shaped version of it, fed to her deliberately to make Jerome's company appear less valuable than it was, so that she would walk into any settlement conversation already holding the wrong number in her head. He told her that whether she had understood exactly what she was participating in, or whether she had simply trusted the man she was with and not asked the questions she should have asked, it did not change what happened, and it did not change where they were right now. He told her he was not there to argue about the marriage. He was not there to distribute fault, or sit through a list of what he had failed to provide. He had already decided he was not going to do that, and he was not going to change his mind this morning. Renee's mouth opened. Jerome set 2 documents on the table, the divorce filing on the left, his attorney's cover letter on the right. 1 page, plain language, laying out the ownership structure of the house, the actual asset picture of the marriage, and the projected settlement figure as calculated by Jerome's attorney after a full financial review. He slid them toward Andrea. "Take your time," he said. Renee leaned in and began reading over Andrea's shoulder. After about 15 seconds, she straightened up and said, "This isn't Jerome. There are 8 years of—" Phyllis looked at her. That was all. One look. Level. Quiet. With the weight of a woman who had earned the right to say everything she was choosing not to say. Renee's sentence stopped where it was and did not start again. Andrea was still reading the cover letter. She read it once. Then she went back to the top and read a section of it again. The paragraph about the house, Jerome suspected, and the clear, direct language his attorney had used to explain that the house sat on inherited land predating the marriage and had been constructed by Jerome's own company, and that Andrea's legal claim to it was not what she had planned for it to be. Jerome watched her face. There was no explosion. There was no argument. What crossed Andrea's face was quieter than that, and, in its own way, harder to watch. The slow deflation of a person whose plan had just stopped working. She had built something in her mind, a version of this ending that made sense, that gave her what she had decided she deserved. That version required Jerome to be smaller than he was, less prepared, less capable, more damaged by everything that had happened than he was showing himself to be. He had never been that man. She set the letter down. Jerome thanked them both for coming. He crossed the kitchen and held the front door open. 4 months later. The company was Jerome's, completely and legally and finally his. Every account, every contract, every vendor relationship that Darius had spent 18 months quietly attempting to hollow out. The buyout had closed at the adjusted valuation. After legal fees, after the civil settlement that Darius's attorney had strongly recommended he accept to avoid criminal exposure, Darius had walked away with a number that bore almost no resemblance to the one he had been planning on. The regional contracting firm had come back to Jerome 6 weeks after the deal collapsed. They came back differently the second time. No intermediary, no misrepresented authority, just a direct call to Jerome's office asking if he was open to a conversation. Jerome had reviewed their proposal, revised 2 clauses himself, and signed. It was the largest single professional relationship his company had ever carried. The work was already underway. Darius was renting a 1-bedroom apartment in a city 2 hours away. His name still traveled in the industry, but it traveled differently now, quietly, carefully, in the way that bad information moves through a community built on referrals and handshakes and the question of whether a man's word means anything. It did not arrive with an announcement. It did not need to. Karen's divorce had finalized 5 weeks after she and Jerome had sat across from each other in that diner. The house, always in Karen's name, purchased with her family's inheritance, stayed with Karen. The life she and Darius had built together, the dinner parties and the social standing and the ease of being a couple that other people respected, had turned out to be a thing that required Karen's architecture to exist. Without it, the structure had nothing to stand on. Darius's charm, Jerome had come to understand, had always been like that. It needed someone else's foundation underneath it to look like something real. Whatever Darius and Andrea had shared, the thing they had dismantled 2 marriages and a 19-year friendship to have, had ended quietly, somewhere around the 2nd round of attorney's letters. Jerome had heard this through Troy, who had heard it through someone at the supply yard, which was how most true things eventually traveled. Jerome received the information, noted it, and set it down. He did not find satisfaction in it. He found confirmation. Their plan had required him to lose. He had not lost. Without that, they had never had anything real to build toward. He thought about this occasionally, only briefly, the way you think about weather that has already passed. The new job site was on the east side of the county, a residential development, 12 units, the largest single contract Jerome had ever signed under his own name alone. The framing was 3 days in. The crew was good. The morning was clear and cold, and the sky above the open frame was the particular shade of pale blue that showed up in October when the air had just turned. Troy was beside him, reviewing a materials order on a clipboard, running his finger down the list with the focused energy of a man who had found the right place for himself. He had been like this for weeks, steadier, more settled. The hot urgency that had burned in him all autumn quieted down into something that looked more like purpose. Jerome signed off on the delivery schedule and looked up at the frame rising against the sky. Raw lumber. Open joists. The clean geometry of something that was not finished yet. The part of a build that Jerome had always loved most, when the shape of the thing was clear, but the work was still ahead of you. He picked up his pen. He signed off on the plans. He got back to work. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.